I want to thank everyone for attending today's session on data to help tell your story, the first step in your EDI strategy. This session is focused on building a more inclusive workplace culture. Creating an inclusive culture matters in the manufacturing sector because of the skills shortage, retention, need for innovation, and it's the right thing to do. We will begin with a few foundational concepts and explore how to enhance workplace culture and practices towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. My name is Walter Garrison, and I am the Advanced Manufacturing Business Integrator for the City of Mississauga, working out of our Mississauga Economic Development Office. I work with manufacturing companies in the aerospace, automotive, food and beverage, clean technologies, medical devices, sectors, as well as with our specialty manufacturers. We have many world-class and globally leading manufacturers in Mississauga, and I, along with my economic development colleagues, assist them in talent and workforce development, site selection, expansion and retention, business-to-business connections, continuous improvement, supply chains, and export market development, amongst our other services. Our Mississauga EDO advocates on behalf of our manufacturers to other levels of government and provides connections to those agencies that can assist them with their growth opportunities and challenges. Before we proceed, I want to inform all attendees about a few key points regarding today's session. Audio is available for speakers and panelists only. The camera display is for speakers and panelists only. This session is being recorded and will be available after today's webinar. For all attendees today, please use the chat area to offer comments and ask questions. Please address these to all panelists. Today's presentation, resources, and a feedback survey will be emailed to attendees following today's session. We acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day City of Mississauga as being part of the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot nations. We recognize these people and their ancestors as people who inhabited these lands since time immemorial. The City of Mississauga is home to many global Indigenous peoples. So back in March of 2020, the before times as we like to call them, our Mississauga Economic Development Office hosted Building Skill Talent Together, an event where we brought together our Mississauga manufacturers, colleges, universities, secondary schools, government agencies, and stakeholder groups to discuss and develop solutions to the skilled talent shortage currently facing the advanced manufacturing sector in Mississauga. And while this is a global challenge, our Mississauga EDO was and is focused on finding solutions to having more people trained and employed in the occupations within manufacturing that require STEM skills. One of the organizations we worked with at the event was Build a Dream, who ran one of the workshops as part of this event. The Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing also participated in this event. And this is where I first met Noor. Noor Fawaz is the founder and CEO of Build a Dream. Noor is a dynamic person who is really committed to the mission of her organization, Build a Dream, which delivers specialized programs to encourage and empower women, students, to explore careers where women are underrepresented, while also working to create a gender-balanced workforce and to change global perspectives on women's contribution to society. In the spring of 2021, our Mississauga Economic Development Office, in conjunction with Build a Dream, held 2 meetings with women in management and human resource positions representing a number of Mississauga's leading manufacturers. And from these meetings, Mississauga EDO and Build a Dream have developed this program intended to have more women participate, stay, and advance in the Mississauga advanced manufacturing workforce. These lunch and learn sessions on recruitment and attraction, retention, and advancement of women in the advanced manufacturing workforce is a result of our earlier Mississauga EDO events and is part of Mississauga EDO's diversity and inclusion initiatives. We have a number of objectives for our 3 lunch and learn sessions. We want to encourage more women to consider a career in advanced manufacturing with one of our many excellent companies in Mississauga. We want to assist you on this webinar today in your recruitment and attraction of women into available employment positions in your organization. We also want to help you retain the women that you hire within your organization. The pandemic has led to a number of significant and impactful changes for manufacturers globally. A number of women have left positions in the industry as they have been the primary child care provider. And while manufacturing companies have been operating during COVID, many have done so at a reduced capacity. Now that a number of sectors are ramping up their production levels and volumes, will the workforce that experienced layoffs or left their roles by choice come back to their positions? Retention is a real challenge, and I hear this from a number of companies that I work with and assist. For the women that have left the advanced manufacturing workforce during the pandemic, the challenge is for companies to determine how to attract and recruit them again. I would also like to remind everyone about the upcoming Lunch and Learn sessions that are part of the Women in Mississauga Manufacturing Series. Next Tuesday, November 30th at 12 noon, our Mississauga EDO will be hosting a session with Build a Dream on a new approach to talent attraction, brand building, and recruitment, which will feature Noor as well as Janine Lasselin-Berglund, the president of the Canadian Association of Mold Makers and Automate Canada, as well as Jonathan Atsaparty, president and CEO of Laval International, which designs, engineers, and manufactures molds for heavy trucks, recreational vehicles, military, and government applications. The week after that, on Tuesday, December 7th at 12 noon, we will be concluding our Women in Mississauga Manufacturing Lunch and Learn sessions, and we'll discuss tangible tools to help with retention. This session will feature Noor, along with Rebecca Chenier, who is working as a mechanic at Hiram Walker & Sons in Windsor and is a Red Seal Industrial Millwright. We will also have Kim Thierra, President and CEO of Acetronic, a Mississauga manufacturer of industrial controls, and Simi Thierra, Acetronic's Director of Strategic Development and Sales. I would now like to introduce Noor and our speakers. Noor is the founder and CEO of Build a Dream and will be leading today's session. Noor Hakem Fawaz wants to change global perspectives on women's contribution to society. Inspired by her mother's perseverance to excel in a male-dominated field, Noor dug deep into the why behind the lack of women in skilled trades. She realized that the barriers keeping women out of these rewarding careers were common to other male-dominated paths and created a nonprofit to encourage and empower young women to explore careers that they may never have considered. Noor's challenge to listeners is that one must first address internal preconceptions before being capable of making significant strides that transform our work and world. A brilliant connector and facilitator, audiences are drawn to her candor and unique perspective from an extensive career in workforce development and her lived experiences as a woman of color. She shares energetic stories of what leaders are doing right and offers real-world examples of how embracing diverse workplaces accelerates success. Noor earned her Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Windsor and expanded Build a Dream across Canada while completing her MBA, raising children, and earning many awards and accolades. She spends each day following her passion, creating equity not just in the workplace, but in all of the spaces around us. I would also like to introduce representatives from the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. Brendan Sweeney is its managing director and participated in Mississauga EDO's previous Building Skill Talent Together session. Eva Quan is a research assistant, and Shannon Miller is a program officer with Trillium. I will now ask Noor from Build a Dream to take us through today's session. Noor.
Thank you so much, Walter, for that warm introduction, and to the City of Mississauga Economic Development Corporation for this amazing partnership. I also want to welcome Shannon and Eva to the virtual stage. Before I get started, I would like to just do a land acknowledgement. So Build a Dream would like to acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water originally inhabited by Indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. Build a Dream would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we broadcast from today is a traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi peoples. We're grateful to work, learn, and live in this area. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. For those that don't know, Build a Dream is a not-for-profit organization that started in Windsor, Ontario, and is now across Canada. And our main goal is to support young women in making career-informed decisions by encouraging them to go into the skilled trades, science, technology, engineering, math, emergency response, and entrepreneurship. We solely focus on male-dominated industries, but also on industries that have a significant job shortage and a demand, while also ensuring that we're supporting young women in making those career-informed decisions that's going to lead to financial independence. As Walter mentioned 2 years ago, actually the last event we attended before COVID was the City of Mississauga's manufacturing roundtable, specifically talking about the challenges companies were facing, one being diversifying their workforce. And I was truly impressed by the City of Mississauga's commitment to the industry and to the community to really help advance workplaces for not only attracting and recruiting more diverse applicants, but really focus on retention and advancement. And before I left, the last conversation I had was with Brendan from Trillium and his team. And he said, what do we need to do about this situation? It's not going to happen overnight. We need to solve these problems and we need to commit to action. And I couldn't have agreed more with Brendan. So we exchanged emails, and then they launched a report that Eva and Shannon are going to talk about. And they committed to action. And it's been 2 years, and they've published 2 reports, and they continue on sharing their findings with stakeholders across Canada. So there are 5 things I want to ask of you today before I take it over I let Shannon and Eva take it over. This is a conversation that's near and dear to my heart. I will, as Walter mentioned, I will talk about my lived experience, but also my position as the president of Build a Dream and the many amazing stories that women have trusted me with over the years, but also the many challenges and candid conversations that I've had with industry. So what I do know and what I'd like to ask of you is to leave space for openness where nothing is categorized. So what do I mean by that? Leave some of your opinions and thoughts behind and start fresh in learning what Shannon and Eva are going to enrich us with today. Empathy with yourself and with those around you. And what I mean by that is it gets uncomfortable when you begin to realize unconsciously your biases have actually limited certain individuals' progress or has impacted equity within your workplace. I believe it's okay as long as we're reflective and mindful of what steps we're going to take forward. Building a diverse organization does not happen overnight. It takes comprehensive effort and continuous investment over time. I can't repeat this enough because similar to any strategy that an organization builds, whether it's a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan, diversity and inclusion is one of those strategies that must be invested in over time and constantly reassessed. Asking yourself, why are you here and what do you want to achieve after today's session? This is a 45-minute to an hour session. We're not going to solve the problems today. Today, we're going to talk about how data can help you shape your story. But you want to ask yourself, what are you committing to after today's session? Lastly, start reflecting as you go through these examples. What biases and unconscious biases do you have going into this workshop? And what mindfulness and openness and reflection have you done after the workshop? So I want to thank again Walter for launching these 3 series sessions. This is the one of the 3, and it's going to start by introducing the Trillium Network to share how do we begin to look at our data and help it shape our story. Eva and Shannon are going to talk about Bridges Not Barriers, Advancing Racialized Women in Ontario Manufacturing, and also their findings from Gender Diversity in Ontario Manufacturing lesson from 5 leading companies. So without further ado, I want to thank Eva and Shannon for joining us, and I'll give you the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Noor. So my name is Eva Quan. I'm a research assistant at the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. So I've worked on actually both of the reports that Noor had mentioned about workforce diversity. And my background is in industrial organizational psychology. And right now I'm currently a PhD candidate in one of the programs. I'm going to pass it over to Shannon.
And I'm Shannon. I'm a program officer at the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. My background is in labor studies from McMaster University. I was more involved with the project on racialized women in manufacturing. And at the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing, we're focused on, as was mentioned before, raising awareness of the Ontario advanced manufacturing ecosystem. We do asset and capabilities mapping in addition to the two reports that we'll be referencing a lot today as we cover this topic, where we'll be going over why data is important on your journey to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also some companies that we've found that have successfully moved that dial forward on EDI in their organizations. So we're going to start with what we know about the manufacturing sector at large. We know that there is a labor shortage. We know that employment in the sector has largely plateaued over the last several years. The pandemic has made that quite a bit worse. In addition to high unemployment, the sector has also seen within the last fiscal year, a 42% increase in job vacancies within manufacturing. So manufacturers have to rethink their recruitment efforts to properly engage members of this increasingly diverse workforce. And by engage, we mean actively working to attract, recruit, retain, and advance people within the sector, including people that we have not seen throughout the sector or throughout many different types of roles within the sector over the years. Women in general make up almost half of the Ontario workforce, but 29% of the manufacturing workforce and 18% of manufacturing management roles. For racialized women, who are 13% of the Ontario workforce, they're 10% of the manufacturing workforce and 4.6% of manufacturing management roles. So we see that there is range in people's experiences, and within this group of women, there's a pretty wide range in terms of how much they earn, the roles that they're concentrated in, the industries that they're concentrated in. Generally, women and women of color are concentrated in the more lower paid industries, so clothing and textiles, food and commercial bakeries, where they'd earn anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 less than the average earnings within Ontario manufacturing in general. And the sector, especially when we're looking at leadership and higher paid industries and higher paid roles, it doesn't really reflect the diversity of the overall market. So manufacturers that are trying to bolster and strengthen their workforce are going to have to do the work of attracting and engaging the best and brightest within the overall workforce, which is going to include people that we generally don't see heading towards or staying in manufacturing or advancing within it very much. So that inclusion has to apply across the board and at all levels. And we have some recommendations for where manufacturers can start if they'd like to improve attraction and retention to maintain an inclusive workforce. An important finding in our research is that this does not happen by accident. It has to be intentional. And so we're going to start for this entire Lunch and Learn series with looking at how data is a crucial part of your journey to inclusion and diversity. A pretty substantial barrier to inclusion is a lot of companies feeling like they don't know where to start, or assuming that they don't have the means or the resources or the information to focus on this. We're recommending that you start with the numbers. Start by taking a good look at your workforce and your operations. See where you can maybe do a bit better, because it is very difficult to manage what you cannot measure. Manufacturers in general, companies in general really, but manufacturers specifically already know this. They function and grow by intentionally tracking their metrics, whether it's their production outputs, their line stoppages, their rates of quality defects. So that strategic approach has to also apply to their workforce development. And at this rate, the sector, considering the labor shortage and everything else, the sector has no choice but to consider that and apply everything a little bit more strategically. So that includes some data that at first glance might be uncomfortable to review, but it is a starting point, and it's important to see the gaps as an opportunity to correct the areas that you maybe weren't paying close enough attention to before. So my colleague Eva is going to be exploring this more in depth, but your human resource information system ideally already collects a lot of this information, and she'll be going over that.
All right, so really depending on what your data is telling you, you'll be taking different actions. There really is no one size fits all kind of solution here. And once you get your data, you can decide where to dedicate your resources, because resources are limited. So whether that's to recruitment, retention, or advancement of women in manufacturing, you might have completely different priorities. So the first thing that you can collect is what's the representation of women within your workforce. So employers can collect demographic data, whether that's gender, age, race, etc., if their purpose is for removing systemic barriers or for fighting discrimination. So once you identify these gaps, where are there different percentages within between different demographic groups, between men, between women, etc., then you can really focus on them. So within our Trillium reports, we do provide some benchmarks for you in case you wanted to see within the manufacturing sector how you compare, within Ontario how you compare, or within specific occupations how you compare. So for example, even though manufacturing is 29% women on average in Ontario, when you look at the trades, it'd be 6%. So these benchmarks would differ depending on what you're interested in. So I'll just give an example with Sanofi, one of the companies that we interviewed for our first report, and what they do for recruitment. So they really check for biases in the language within their job ads. They try to not use words that would deter anyone because of any stereotypes that they're conjuring. They also give training, inclusion training, to all of the recruiters. So if your company outsources this recruitment, you could probably also provide this training to anyone that you're contracting in to help recruit and attract talent. Another thing that Sanofi does, as well as some other companies that I've interviewed, is they include visible women at every stage of the recruitment. So when you're interviewing your prospective candidates, do you have a woman represented there? About that. So number two, you can collect information about the selection rate. So of the applicants, how many women are invited to the interviews? What percentage? Of the interview candidates, how many women are selected for the jobs? And this is in comparison to other demographic groups like men. So Honda, they actually found that their selection rate for their applicants was the same for men and women. So because of this data, they then pivoted their focus. Instead, they focused on creating this Women at Honda event, this realistic job preview, where they would invite women into their plants, take a tour, have question and answer sessions, really understand and be within the vibe of the organization. And what they ended up having was 99% of these women that attended, there was no commitment to apply at all. 99% of them ended up submitting an application. And so for production, they went from 16% back in 2018 to now about 29% women. So there was real impact with this. But in contrast, if you do find that there's a difference between different demographic groups and people getting the job offers, then perhaps focus on finding the biases in the interviewing or hiring process. So from research, we do know that if there's only one woman candidate at your interview, there's statistically 0% chance that she's going to get hired. So what does Honda do? They hire in cohorts. So if you're going to be hiring, you want to boost your number of women, you see that they're underrepresented, they'll hire at least 2 at a time. That way they have a buddy to go along their career path in. All right, number 3 is retention rate. So how long are people staying in your company? And you don't just have to look at men versus women. You can look at whether racialized women versus unracialized women, etc. Whether people of these specific groups are more at risk of leaving the positions. So Cascades, a paper product company, Canadian company, they actually track who's at risk of leaving each position. So if they found a difference between these groups, then they figure out what they can do to help them stay. So what better way to find out than to ask your employees? So of Mad Elevator, Muskoka Brewery, Sanofi, and Cascades, they all have flex time available. And of course, with the pandemic, we know how important that is. So flex time can take different forms. So you may be able to offer your employees a working from home opportunity, reducing the number of days they have at work, offering part-time. So focusing really on getting your deliverables done versus being at a specific place at a certain time. And then also allowing people to have different start times. So as you know, sometimes if you're parents, you may have to provide childcare, but childcare might open at the same time that your shift starts. So this kind of excludes a portion of the population that you could have in your workforce if you don't have this flexibility in place. One other thing that Mad Elevator does is they provide career coaching. So they have this engagement survey that goes out, and they found out from the employees that employees wanted it, whether or not they were in management. So sometimes you only restrict these opportunities to people in leadership roles. But Mad Elevator doesn't want to just be a stepping stone in someone's career. They want to be somewhere where people want to develop and stay over time, because training costs money, right? We want to retain the talent that we have. One other thing that they do ask to really gauge whether or not their employees are happy and want to stay at their company is asking their employees about their sense of belonging, whether or not they would want to refer their friends to the company, and if they have friends at work. They've also implemented a buddy system. So every newcomer to Mad Elevator, which is, by the way, based in Mississauga, an elevator fixture and cab interiors company, they give them a buddy so that they can cross-train, they can learn from their buddy, and they have someone to eat with at lunch. All right, so that was retention. Number 4 is advancement rate. So what percentage of people are getting promotion offers, and is this different between your women employees and your men employees, or any other groups that you may be interested in? So for Cascades, they found that they didn't really have many women VPs, vice presidents. So what they ended up doing, because they saw this gap in their data, they decided to invest in leadership training and provide more mentorship to women. So this resulted in almost half of the VPs being women now. So really, again, look into your data, see where the gaps are, and then decide what to do. Number 5 is compensation. So you can conduct a pay equity audit to see if you're allocating your compensation equitably among people in the same roles or people that perform similar functions. And if there's a difference, then critically examine the formal documentation that you have or practices, and look for the biases or unintentional things that may be happening in the process that's causing this inequity. So Sanofi actually undertook this gigantic effort, put in the resources to do this, and now as a result, they no longer ask for salaries of what people have had at the previous jobs. And this is because if you weren't paid fairly at your last job, they don't want this inequity to carry over to Sanofi, right? That's for compensation. So these stats that I've mentioned before, so representation in different occupation, the selection rate, the retention rate, and advancement rate and compensation, these can really help you identify whether or not how inclusive you really are. So inclusivity and inclusive climate is really, we know 3 things, right? So there's equitable employment practices. So you're seeing, are you treating your employees equitably? Are they getting the same compensation if they're in similar roles? Are you hiring and advancing people? Is it about the same for different demographic groups, right? Are you really providing that for people? Are you including people with differences? Is the representation of women within your company in different roles, and how good are you at retaining them? And then lastly, are you inclusive in the decision-making process? So in your leadership, do you have diverse representation? Are there women? Are there racialized women? Are there, because this is for women in manufacturing, I'm saying women, but like for whichever demographic group you might want to be more inclusive of, are they able to give input on policies and practices? So really, this is a starting point for our data collection. You probably already collect a lot of this data, but maybe you don't look at it by demographics. So this is really an opportunity for you to see where your gaps are, identify them, hopefully before your competition does, because we do have the benchmarks, and if anyone does require Ontario benchmarks or Ontario manufacturing benchmarks, we have them in our reports, but we have more detailed things on our end as well. I'll pass it over to Shannon now, who'll talk a bit about leadership.
And before we move into the recommendations for leadership, Walter, I'm not sure if that would work with our format, but do you have the questions that we wanted to put up for our attendees to consider? Okay. So the first one, these are just some questions to really like evaluate where your standing is so that you can decide where you'd like to go next. So first, do you collect demographic data on your workforce? So that includes information that is likely already in your human resource information system, where your employees live, their classifications, information like that. Second, do you collect employee engagement data? So employee engagement is how you learn what your employees value and ensure that your organization aligns with that. That ultimately affects whether or not they see the job as meaningful, whether or not they're invested in what their employer is trying to accomplish as an organization, and it affects their job satisfaction, which affects retention. And then finally, do you have a process for employee input? So that could be a suggestion process or any other forum that allows you to follow up, because that's what's really important here. Being able to follow through with a plan based on what your employees' inputs are. So Support from leadership, as far as our recommendations go, support from leadership is absolutely essential. It increases the likelihood that your employees are going to be invested in whatever it is that you're trying to implement. How a company functions is a reflection of what its leadership values. And we recommend that leaders are very deliberate and active in shaping their organizational culture. So that includes being considerate of the metrics that you prioritize tracking, the initiatives that you're dedicating your resources to, and who you're actively recruiting, training, developing, and promoting within your organization. The organization structures and systems also have to be factored in. So you have to formalize these values that you've developed within actual policies in your company, instead of just releasing sweeping inclusion statements without very much to back that up. So there are some things to consider as well. Eva mentioned inclusion and leadership. A couple of extra questions for you here that would be poll questions, but more like for discussion. Can your employees look at their leadership and see themselves? And if they cannot, why is that the case, and how can that be corrected? Another thing to consider, what policies exist within your organization around inclusion? How diverse is your hiring committee? Where do you typically focus your recruitment efforts, and for what roles do you use those recruitment efforts for? So Eva can walk us through a couple more of those action items or action plans in order to implement.
Thanks, Shannon. So there are a lot of things that we say we want to consider, but what can we actually do? So your action items by the leadership should help shape this organizational culture. So you want to really dedicate resources to do this data collection, signal to your employees that you do care about their inclusion. So one example that I have for you is Cascade. So if you go into their website, you'll see that they're very transparent about the specific practices and policies, what their goals are to achieve women being represented within their company. Number two is to train, promote, and develop people who are underrepresented in certain roles in your organization. So as much as you say you want to include women, well, what do you actually do? For your existing employees, are you training them? Are you giving them a place to grow their careers? And one example of this, again, is Mad Elevator. They provide career coaching. Number three is evaluate your organization's readiness to take on new talent. So while you may have the intention, are you actually ready? Do your organization's values align with the values of your potential applicants? If they value diversity, do you as well? And do you signal it in the right way? So do you have parental leave policies? So you may have maternal leave policies. Do you have any for paternal leave? What facilities are available for employees? So do you have childcare? Do you have accessible washrooms? Are there specified facilities for women? Is there safe parking and facilities? So people, their shifts may sometimes start very early in the morning before it's bright, or end very late at night while it's super dark. Is there bright lighting to help them feel safe on the walk into the plants? So these are just some of the things that could help you signal that you may or may not be ready yet, and if not, you can work on these. And number four is ensure the employees are able to provide input on your decision-making processes. So for Cascades, they actually have a diversity and inclusion committee where they pass through all their practices and policies that are in development. Are your employees able to give input through engagement surveys or any kind of survey, any kind of feedback up to management levels? So those are some action items, and I'll let Shannon give a summary of.
Yes, so just an overview of a lot of what we've spoken about, and also some of the takeaways from our reports here at the Trillium Network. Like Noor mentioned at the beginning, it can be overwhelming sometimes to figure out exactly, or to find out exactly where your blind spots were and how they may have affected people. But it's important to view this as the opportunity that it is to update more traditional methods to recruitment and retention within manufacturing. With that said, ideas are great, but it is important to have a plan. It will be very difficult to get to a future state of genuine, sustainable, increased workforce diversity without a plan in place. And as a part of that plan, you're going to need data. You're not going to be able to measure yourself against where you are now and where you want to be properly without data. And that includes the demographics, occupation, earnings, and other classification data. And it all goes back to that data. So any programs or policies that you implement should be in response to what the data is telling you. And on top of that, any updates or further development to those programs should be in response to your data, which will tell you where you are in regards to your goals. So that is everything that we have, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Eva and Shannon. That was a lot of amazing information. I do want to now start our fireside chat, but before I get started, I know we have about 7 minutes before we're going to wrap up this first lunch and learn session. I'm going to ask those in attendance to ask your questions, and then I will ask them away to Shannon and Eva. But in the meantime, some questions I often get from some of the stakeholders. So you did mention some really great best practices. But what if I'm a small company and I don't have a human resource department and I don't have the resources to start a diversity and inclusion committee? Where do I begin?
Okay, so ideally, even if you don't have like a large department or a lot of resources, somebody's handling your HR. And that person should be familiar with the methods and the data and the reporting metrics around your workforce. So it's a good idea to find out first what gaps you're trying to fill where your traditional methods are not working. So your first question that you'd have to answer is, what is it costing your organization to not do things differently? And so whether it's issues around retention, where you now have to spend even more money to try to hire additional people, or around overtime hours because you don't have enough personnel in the plant. Knowing this also helps you in terms of getting supportive leadership, because if you're able to explain that you're having these issues and this is what it's costing the organization, they're more likely to be on board for inclusion and diversity initiatives.
And just to add to that, if someone really doesn't have any data at all and they're looking to find out, they can send out a simple survey outside, collect the data in Excel and make the comparison. That's like, if you are really low on resources, you can start with that.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me from about a time where in Windsor, Essex, because we're very much manufacturing focused. We have a large industry here. And when we ask companies, why is it that they don't have women on their shop floor, their comments and answers were, well, women just don't apply. So they thought it was a recruitment barrier and that women just didn't want these positions. That's essentially what they truly believe. They're like, oh, we would hire men or women. We're in such desperate need. So then when we launched a training program specifically designed to help companies fill their labor shortage, and we trained 25 women on the shop floor for 25 weeks, and we went back to find placements, companies began saying the exact same barriers that you highlighted. We don't have what they called maternity friendly policies, not family friendly policies. They didn't have women facilities on the shop floor. And so they began to realize that they didn't feel that they have the retention or advancement strategy within the workplace to really ensure that once they get women through their doors, that they will keep them. But that was a perfect opportunity for us to start having these conversations with them about, we could talk about awareness and recruitment, but once you meet those goals, you at the same time should be reflective of the retention and advancement, all the pipeline, the entire pipeline. So I appreciate that feedback that you provided. Another question that came up, and this happens often, it's really small companies that face I would argue, face the largest barriers in implementing all these initiatives. How can a small company hire in cohorts like Honda has done with 2 female hires at a time? If a company can't do this, what else can they do?
We can also,
Oh, go ahead,
I
sorry.
was gonna say, they can provide some peer mentorship. So really with the idea of cohorts is you have someone that's going through the same thing with you, or someone that you can talk to or socialize with, so that you don't feel that you're alone, right? But if you have like a peer mentor, someone that can take them through the ropes, that could be really helpful.
Right. And your question is primarily around not being able to have like a mass hiring event like that. Job fairs are typically very useful in scenarios like that. So companies that are able to conduct or host job fairs in order to bring in, at the very least, to introduce people to your organization, that is also very helpful, because usually for organizations and whether or not people are interested in them, they will often tell somebody if they have come across an organization that they're interested in. So that can also affect your recruitment.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
You did, yeah, that answered the question. And I think ultimately, just to add to that question and to your answers, is we can find reasons as to why we can't do certain best practices, but we can get creative and look internally into our resources. The goal today is to really have that discussion that it's going to take meaningful, reflective, and intentional work to really solve your challenges in recruiting a diverse talent pool. The last question I want to address is, how would you recommend manufacturers with production schedules to even consider flex time?
Well, we know from Sanofi, who do deal with like live specimen, right? They do have flex time. So they have flexible start hours. They were able to figure it out. So I think really look critically when you actually need people on the production line.
Yeah, I think so.
And the same with the other companies. They were able to accommodate whenever possible. Of course, if you're in an office role, it's a bit easier to work from home, and that's not possible for many production. But
Yeah,
work with your employees.
that it goes back to everything that we were saying before about the importance of employee engagement. You're going to find the people will tell you exactly what it is that they value and where they would need a bit more flexibility. And then you're able to work with that information to develop whatever programs you would have to meet their needs.
That's an excellent example. Next week, we're going to have Jonathan as a party from Laval, who owns now more of a medium shop in Windsor, Essex, and he had that same problem. So he did provide that flex time because he realized that not all his employees needed to start at 7 a.m. Daycares did not open until 7:30 a.m. By the time the employee got there, it was 8 a.m. So at first he presented it as providing an exception to the women employee. But then when realizing that that kind of disrupted how the rest of the employees felt, so others came and said, well, if she can start at this time, why can't I start like a little bit later? He realized that he wanted to create a policy that was inclusive to all. So if you had other family obligations, whether you're a man or woman, you would be able to tap into this flex time. And he realized that once he presented it that way, he didn't target just women barriers. He said, okay, well, in general, there's going to be fathers that may need to drop off their children at daycare. This is something my company should be progressive in offering. And that changed the whole perception of how these policies were implemented into the workplace. So you'll be able to hear more from Jonathan Azzopardi and Janine Lastline next week. But in the meantime, I want to thank Eva and Shannon for their incredible research findings and feedback. If someone wanted to start tracking, where could they find tools?
So as far as when you're talking about tracking tools for around their workforce, so Eva mentioned before, you can very often start as simply as surveys and the data within your workforce. So a lot of the times companies already have a human resource information system that's collecting this information for them. What's the utility of that information? What are you doing with it? Is it just sitting in that database that you've held it in? So that is a lot of the times you very often already have the tools available to you. It's just a matter of figuring out how to use them in order to achieve what it is that you're trying to achieve. And it would also depend on the human resource information system as well. Does it have a reporting system built into it? Do you have another reporting system, and what kind of information are you collecting? So
I think also for some more sensitive information, you might want to let the employees know whether it will be anonymized or not. So if you are asking like how they feel, if they feel like they belong or whatnot, that might be more close to the heart. You might want to have it anonymized.
yes. Another tool that I think would be very useful is having a fully developed suggestion process. Because again, on the employee engagement front, you learn a lot about what people value that way. Or if you have a suggestion process in place, do people engage with it? And if they do not, then you recognize that you have an issue around employee engagement, and then you can start taking steps to correct that. So these are just a few of the tools that are very, very useful. Your own human resource information system, surveys that you can build to send out to your employees, and then also a suggestion process.
Perfect. Thank you.
And of course, I'll just plug in that we have both of our diversity reports online for free on our Trillium website.
Yes, where we have like actual actionable items that can be applied to workforces of any size.
And that goes beyond data collection.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I did also make notes, and something I will be discussing with Walter offline is the email, just to kind of recap this event. Some tools and resources and links that we could send to you, to those in attendance, to ensure that you do have access to the links and resources and reports to really simplify as much as we can your efforts in diversifying your workforce. So on that note, I'd like to hand back the mic to Walter.
Thank you very much, Noor. I greatly appreciate it. Shannon and Eva, thank you very much for the insights that you provided today. They've been very helpful, very useful. And Noor, thank you very much for moderating and leading this first session. I just wanted to, again, I'm going to share my screen and just remind everyone about the next session that we do have on Tuesday of next week. And that will be regarding talent attraction, brand building. And as you said, we have Janine Lasseling-Berglund and Jonathan Atsaparty from Laval International there. So just want to remind people to, if you have not registered for this session, please register for this session as well. And again, I want to thank our speakers from the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing, Eva Quan and Shannon Milner, as well as Brendan Sweeney from the Trillium Network for Advanced Manufacturing. And Noor, I'd like to thank you again for leading this and for the insights that we've been able to glean from today's session. And we look forward to the next two sessions to help our Mississauga manufacturers attract, recruit, retain, and advance more women in advanced manufacturing. So thank you for those people that have attended.